Has the Brownlow Medal lost its shine? The AFL and the umpire community were left stunned at the end of last year following a betting scandal related to the coveted Brownlow Medal. This most prestigious award in the AFL relies solely on the integrity of the umpires and their impartiality of their decisions on the field and how they award votes. The investigation of the incident concluded that an umpire had passed on information about the Brownlow Medal, but there was no evidence of influence on the voting process. However, questions remain concerning the fairness and the integrity of the award. What if the Brownlow Medal wasn't fair to begin with? What if the likelihood of receiving the award isn't equal for all players? Here's an unlikely hypothetical, but bear with me. What if two players have the same disposals, same impact on a match, but there are other non-footy factors that increase the likelihood of a player getting votes? What if other things like status, milestone, games predict a higher chance of getting votes? Are players who are more recognisable, or with blonde hair, or who are bald, or any other non-footy factors increase their likelihood of winning the award? If this is in fact the case, does it change your opinion of the Brownlow Medal? James Coventry writes in his book, Footballistics, there are few more damaging accusations than bias to an umpire. I'll link a copy to the book below. But let's be clear, opinion and bias go hand in hand. Emotion is never objective. The story of Greg Williams and the 1993 Brownlow Medal has been used to question the impartiality of the umpire voting system. In 1993, Greg Williams missed out on winning a third Brownlow Medal by 1 vote, losing to Essendon's Gavin Wanganeen. Incredibly, he did not poll a single vote in his round 10 game, where he got 44 disposals. It was revealed by umpire Murray Bird that the senior umpire at the game, John Russo, denied Williams votes because they allegedly did not get along on the field. According to Bird, after that game, he and Russo were discussing who should get votes, and Bird said he thought Williams had been very good in the game. Russo then asked Bird if Williams had given him any grief during the match. When he answered in the affirmative, Russo is alleged to have said, well, him then. Could this be bias? Williams himself believes he should have received at least 1 vote, which would have tied him with Gavin Wanganeen for the medal. Bird said later he watched a replay of the game, the junior umpire, and said it confirmed Williams definitely deserved at least 1 or possibly 2 votes. The AFL Brownlow Medal voting process hasn't changed much with the addition of a third umpire. There's still deliberation between the umpires as to how they allocate the votes. They do it together and not individually. I see 2 main problems with this: decision conformity and the status effect of seniority among the umpires. Conformity can play a big role in decision making, as demonstrated by a famous psychology experiment, Ash's line experiment. The study involved a group of actors in a line who would take turns guessing the length of a line. They all gave the same, intentionally incorrect answer. The non-actor participant went last and they had to guess the correct answer. This trial was conducted 18 times and 76% of participants conformed to the group answer at least once. Another study showed that participants were more likely to conform to the opinions of high-status individuals. This study was set up exactly the same way as the Ash's line study, with one main manipulation. The status of the actors was manipulated. This was done in the form of introducing the actors as either graduate psychology student, low status, up to a senior psychology student, high status. The data showed that the higher the status the individual was, the more likely the participants were to conform to the incorrect answer. Another interesting point is that male participants were more likely to conform in the presence of higher status actors than female participants. This could be a potential issue in the Brownlow voting process, where a senior umpire might have a differing opinion and the junior umpires may not hold their ground, or they may conform to the answer that the senior umpire gives. This becomes especially problematic for the minor vote distribution. While the best on ground player might be obvious and unanimous, it is often more unclear for the second and third best on the field, the 2 and 1 votes respectively. As I've shown you, group conformity and the status of the umpires can impact how votes may be distributed. It's possible, perhaps even likely, that Williams would have had a third Brownlow Medal if Bird was the senior umpire in that instance. Brendan Fevola, AFL bad boy.
Congratulations.
Thanks, Fev.
Ryan O'Keefe.
Thanks, mate.
Oh, I got a stiffy.
Has also suggested that umpires may have held grudges against him for giving them a spray and impacting his chances of winning votes. These anecdotes highlight an inconvenient point: that umpires may not be impartial in their voting, and that non-footy related actions may have a role to play.
Pressure point! Pressure point! Pressure point! Pressure point! Pressure point! Pressure point!
Wayne Carey once suggested that umpires may hold grudges if someone gives them a verbal lashing. His opinion, along with those of Brendan Fevola and other players who have felt slighted over time by the umpires, show that non-football activities can at least affect the perception of umpire impartiality. To investigate this further, it is necessary to look at the scientific evidence, sentiment, and bias. Sentiment can be a thought, view, or attitude which is heavily influenced by emotion, thus significantly affecting the ability to make an objective appraisal. For instance, having a good relationship with the interviewer or your boss could lead to them perceiving your competence as higher than it actually is. Similarly, in sport or investing, a positive outlook of a team or a company may result in an inflated stock price or an unbalanced betting market. A study examined whether sentiment and bias played a role in Brownlow vote outcomes in the form of milestone games. After controlling for within-match production variables such as kicks, handballs, goals, and free kicks, the likelihood the player were going to receive Brownlow votes was higher. This was particularly evident in the 100-game milestone games. Interestingly, this effect was more present in minor vote decisions, which are generally less obvious and more prone to tokenism. In season 2022, it could be argued that sentiment influenced the voting outcome for Dan Hanbury in his last game for St Kilda against Sydney, announcing his retirement the Thursday prior to the game. It's possible that media narratives highlighting this as his farewell game had an effect on the outcome of voting. Similarly, when looking back at Buddy Franklin's 1,000-goal milestone game, it's hard to argue that his 4 goals and a measly 10 disposals should have earned him 1 vote. However, for most footy fans, the most memorable part of the night was undoubtedly his achievement of kicking 1,000 goals, and everybody stormed on the field.
The legend becomes immortal.
With this in mind, it is evident that sentiment can have a significant effect on the voting outcome in AFL games. Therefore, it's important to consider any factors that may have had an influence on voting. A salient stimulus. A salient stimulus is a term used in psychology to refer to a stimuli that stands out and captures attention due to its unusual characteristics. A tongue-in-cheek anecdote written about in footballistics is that umpires should be forced to write 100 times, "I must not be lulled into thinking players with peroxide hair are better players than others." in recognition of the potential bias in their voting. In footballistics, Coventry discusses studies with data scientists who find people with blonde hair more likely to get Brownlow votes. They also find that bald players are more likely to get Brownlow votes. Whilst there are other explanations for these findings, such as blonde or bald players in that data sample are more talented. Another limitation of studies like this is that statistics are inherently rigid in how they're operationally defined. One kick equals one kick, but as viewers of the game, we know that one kick doesn't necessarily equal one kick. One 15-metre pass to your teammate who's not in a better position than you is certainly not better than a 40-metre kick that opens up the play and then leads to a shot on goal. Despite these limitations, the data is still interesting and the findings can be explained by various study phenomena, such as perceptual salience. Perceptual salience is defined as the seeming importance of information that is the focus of people's attention. One study testing perceptual salience had two actors having a conversation, and they had three people on either side. Two people in the middle as the controls, and then two people on either side viewing actors talk. The two on the far side could see actor A better, then the two actors on the other side could see actor B better. The data showed the actors who were in a better view of the participant, that means the participant can see the actor's face, were more likely to be perceived as more impactful on the conversation. None of the studies point to conscious bias, however. It is indicative that non-conscious information absorbed is processed in a way that leads to this kind of result. In time, it will be interesting to see if players with mullets are more likely to get more Brownlow votes, provided there's enough data in the future to test this hypothesis. Next, we have the status relationship with player. The Mathew Effect is an economic theory that people who are higher status are more likely to be evaluated favourably, regardless of the quality of their actions. Another explanation is that prior expectations shape our current judgment of actions. In the context of Aussie rules football, could there be a star effect or a high status player effect? Are more highly regarded players given more leeway in their decisions?
Let's have a look here. Oh boy, yeah. I mean, you can see why Harris Andrews upset. He got one for along here on the boundary line.
Are their disposals viewed as more significant? Are lesser known players given less leeway by the umpires? Are their disposals seen as not as impactful? While there are no AFL studies specific to this topic, it's important to understand that in other sports they have measured the star effect. Basically, the expectation that a better player is more likely to do good can affect how the umpire perceives that player's actions. So outside of the AFL, a study in Major League Baseball tested this hypothesis that the higher the status of the pitcher, the more likely an umpire is to mistakenly call a ball outside the strike zone a strike. To test this hypothesis, the study used subjective umpire calls compared to a pitch FX system which calls pitches accurately to within 1 inch, which gives essentially an objective data set to compare to a subjective data set. The study then observed whether pitchers of lower status were given a smaller strike zone than the higher status pitchers. Findings, and this is interesting, the strike zone for higher status pitchers appears to be slightly larger than for lower status pitchers, giving an advantage to wayward pitching and consequently penalising the batter.
Struck him out looking, and Russ doesn't believe it. And here's
Moving back to the AFL, if we're to copy-paste this status bias, how that might look could be higher profile AFL players might be given more leniency with the ball, allowing them more opportunity to do good things. Or perhaps the umpire simply sees their actions as more meaningful in the context of the match. Conversely, lower status players or lower profile AFL players, think first years, think players from smaller clubs, may be judged more strictly on the same actions, meaning their strike zone is smaller, putting them at a disadvantage. So what do you think? Does this change your opinion of the Brownlow Medal in any way? Some subtle aspects such as sentiment, status, hair colour can all affect Brownlow Medal voting. Furthermore, it has been suggested that certain experienced umpires may have a greater impact on how votes are allocated. Does this change your opinion of the award? If you found this video interesting, please subscribe and share it out. Would you change the award to make voting more objective or keep it exactly the same? If you're a football fan, Footballistics provides an exciting data-driven exploration of the game's history, tactics, all backed up with science, which can be used to support or refute claims about the game. Additionally, I've included links to all the studies I've discussed in this video, so please feel free to check them out.